Hello and welcome to Music Career Radio here on Why DIY Music. I'm your host, Nani Noam Vazana, and my guest today is the fabulous Vanessa Reed. She is the ex-chief executive of PRS Foundation for 10 years, the leading founder of New Music with talent development focus in the UK. And she's currently the new CEO and president of the New Music USA, which is similar to PRS, but they focus on talent development and commissioning new work. She's also the founder of Key Change Initiative that helps European festivals to reach a 50-50% gender balance in their programming. Hello, Vanessa, and welcome to Music Career Radio.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. Actually, I'm quite excited for this conversation. I've prepared a bunch of questions. I hope we have time to do them all.
Great.
Yeah. Would you like to say something about yourself first before we dive into it?
I suppose so. I mean, at the moment, I'm calling in from my apartment, which is in the heart of Brooklyn. So I've been through quite a whirlwind over the past few months. As you know, Brooklyn has been the kind of epidemic of COVID-19. And unfortunately, things are calming down now. So I guess this really just, gives you a reality check and makes sure that you put everything into context and you think about what's really most important. So, there's, on the one hand, we've been thinking a lot about enabling musicians who've lost work to simply survive through an emergency fund that we help run at New Music USA. But also, you mentioned the fact I was founder of Key Change. I think the debate here in the US in particular is very strongly focused on equity at the moment, because this crisis is obviously exposing all of the very dramatic inequalities and challenges in our society. So I guess this is a very good time to be thinking about how we continue to work and to push things forward when it comes to those who are left out, those who are marginalized, and those who don't get as much support and opportunities as others. So that's my current life situation. And otherwise, I've been here since last August. And as you said previously, I was at PRS Foundation for just over 10 years, which was incredible. And now I've come to New York so that I can share that experience, but also learn here about how new music and artist development is supported and resourced in the US. So I'm kind of continuing a lifelong dedication to working with living music creators across all kinds of genres, and being able to enjoy the incredible work that they continue to make every day. So that's where I am at the moment.
It seems that your forte has always been talent development and helping the less fortunate to achieve their art and their goals. So I think it's really nice that you could see actually both sides of the world at the moment, especially the backdrop of the pandemic. Do you see any similarities between the UK and the US at the moment in their reaction to the pandemic and the resources that they offer the artistic community?
The one thing I've been incredibly inspired by here, and I think this is one of the things I wanted to learn about, is, rightly or wrongly, because there isn't widespread support available from government for the arts, what you see is lots of individual patrons stepping forward in times of need. And also you really see artists themselves sensing a responsibility towards those who aren't as well off as they may be. So I think the biggest difference I'm noticing is that whilst, in the UK, there's the incredible, support of Arts Council England or the Arts Council across the UK available in times of emergency. Here, there is the closest equivalent to that is the larger foundations like Mellon Foundation and New York Community Trust. They've all come together to provide emergency relief for artists. But I've never seen anything.
Privatized organizations, right?
Exactly. They're private foundations, often originally set up by one wealthy donor or family. But I think, here what's happened, and I don't think you have this on the same scale in the UK, is that there was just a kind of outpouring of relatively small donations from composers, musicians, conductors, staff of organizations like mine, giving what they could to help musicians who've had lots of cancellations. So we are about to hit our 500,000 target. And this has been to support 1,000 musicians with just small emergency relief grants of $500 each. But I think I've not really seen that kind of mobilizing in the UK amongst individuals in the same way. So it was really great to see how that tradition enabled that support to come forward. On the flip side of that, there are governmental bodies here, like the National Endowment for the Arts. And at New York level, there are some fantastic funders supporting arts and culture, but their resources are just, very small compared to their equivalents across Europe. So that's why this support from individuals is crucial.
Well, it seems to me, at least on my part of Europe, I'm based in the Netherlands, and I also have a lot of working connections in Germany. And I have applied for the funds, to help freelancers and artists here. But it seems that within 4 days, they've exhausted the resources. And I actually received a month later an email saying that I would not be receiving this grant, this emergency grant, because they've exhausted the resources within 4 days, which is quite surprising for me to witness, because I gathered that in Europe, especially in West Europe, there will be more resources and more plans set out to help individuals.
Sure. I mean, that same problem exists here. So when we launched our fund, within 4 hours, we'd had 1,500 applications. And at the beginning, we were only expecting to aim to raise 100,000. So we've had the same challenge. The positive thing, however, is that, we've seen from all of the applicants coming forward that there are lots of people who've applied to the Solidarity Fund who've never applied to New Music USA before. So that means that we are reaching people who really need the support, who maybe don't always access this kind of funding. We made it incredibly simple for people to apply. And there's also a very diverse range of applicants who've come through. So I think, the percentage of artists and musicians who are not white and not from the backgrounds that maybe have been more dominant in New Music USA's history are really coming through. So that's an important thing we want to continue.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was actually surprised regarding the diversity that I've seen in the UK in opposing to the rest of Europe, because I only started performing in the UK in 2019 when I was commissioned to write a new composition for the Manchester Jazz Festival. And later on, I was invited to take part in a PRA convention in Sheffield. It was last September. And I was surprised to discover that the amount of diversity that the UK funders already highlights, and just the fact that I've been touring in Europe in the last 13 years and participated in about, let's say, 40 trade fairs, more or less, and conventions, I must say that I've never seen so much effort and emphasis on both gender balance and ethnic diversity as I have seen in the UK. Why do you think this is the case?
I think one of the reasons, actually, that it's been so much, in the spotlight, if you like, is that we do have public funders who've been trying to encourage arts and music organizations and cultural organizations to think about the diversity of their artists. And they've been talking about this for many years, decades, in fact. So I think having that influence at the level of public funding is really crucial. Obviously, simply cities like London and Birmingham and Manchester, which are great music cities, are just inherently full of talented people from all kinds of backgrounds. So obviously it would be crazy not to see them coming to the forefront of festival lineups and other opportunities in music. I mean, I think it's great that you've seen it to be so positive. I think, when we started Key Change, obviously that was in response to the fact that there was such an incredible lack of female talent on the main festival stages and really across the board, from smaller independent festivals right through to the larger, very commercial outfits. So I think the fact that 300 festivals worldwide have now signed up to that pledge is really crucial, and showing that people want to see a different future. And I hope that they're also recognizing that audiences actually want something different. That there was so many articles, many of them by excellent journalists in The Guardian, actually, and then across the music industry press, just asking really important questions, like, why has the music industry not had its Me Too movement? Why is it only in film that things are really being exposed for what they are? And then that and that helped kind of trigger, some of the debate that was happening just before we launched Key Change. And then it was good timing for us, because the question we were asking about the lack of women on lineups kind of chimed with everything that was happening across the creative industries and across society as a whole. So I'm just really pleased that so many people have got officially involved with Key Change, but also that it's had a rippling effect outside of the programme. So Glastonbury didn't sign up to the pledge, but this year, unfortunately, they've had to cancel. But this was going to be the first year where they could show that they were 50-50 gender balanced. And so the questions that journalists were continually asking them every year about their lineup clearly helped them to really focus on that. So I think that's really positive. So I think, yes, there are great things happening in the UK and in the US, but there is still so much work to do before we really see equity and inclusion in relation to all kinds of diversity, including race, as you were suggesting.
Yeah, sure. And when you started Key Change, did you expect it to be such a huge success within the first year, or did you foresee discouragements from your peers?
Well, I think what was brilliant about Key Change, like any great kind of movement or collaboration, is that it was very organic. And we began by wanting to support a really effective talent development initiative, which would bring music creators and artists together with music industry professionals in a kind of learning network, but also in a program that gave them showcasing opportunities. And that was very much based on everything I'd done at PRS Foundation, because I came up with the sort of shape for the program based on, what we'd done before to support people working internationally, because we knew how important that was. But we'd also run lots of programs, even those like Take 5 with Sirius and London Jazz Festival, which were looking at how, when you bring artists together and when you also connect industry professionals in the mix, what happens is there is this incredible new network formed, which becomes a really important resource for those people as they kind of progress throughout their careers. So that was the starting point. And then it was actually thanks to the festival partners, including Alex Schultz in Reeperbahn Festival in Hamburg, who, pointed out, as we were, talking about announcing our network of 60 artists and innovators, he was saying, well, really, as festivals, we need to say something as well. So we came up with this pledge of, we're all going to try and reach 50-50 by 2022. And then suddenly, whenever I started talking about it in industry conferences, people were coming up to us saying, how can we get involved? How can we get involved? So that's when we decided to launch it as this big public, facing initiative that people could sign up to. And that's when it just started flying. So I think that's really important, that you kind of learn as you go along what's needed next, and you can just instinctively feel what's the right thing to do. And if it has meaning, other people will be inspired by it. So that's what happened.
Yeah, and I think it has to be combined with passion too. I remember when I caught your speech, let's say you were a panel host at the Tallinn Music Week. That's the first time we met. And you were talking about gender balance. And I remember that I was really, really surprised to witness such an eloquent speaker and also with so many valid points, but also with a bit of passion that you don't always find in music related debates. So when you were so convicted about your belief system, I immediately took my phone out and I started going live on my artist page. I never go live on my artist page for anything else than my music. And yet I did that when I heard your speech. And I think this has to do a lot with what you have accomplished and how you can inspire others to accomplish as well. So maybe you can share with me and the viewers, what is this passion about and where do you get these amazing resources and your drive? Because as you probably have encountered with your work, a big part of what musicians deal with is the challenge to stay optimistic and work through their difficulties. It's also a community that is very prone to specific mental health issues, I would say, as let's see, composing is a very lonely profession. I mean, you sit in your room and you're creating this intricate soundscape, but you don't have anyone to share it, and it only comes alive on tour. And sometimes you only do, let's say, 40 concerts a year. So you're kind of isolated. And just the drive that is needed to follow through is crucial for musicians to keep on with their work and get perspective and feedback, later on. So can you please share with us and the viewers a few tips about how to keep up the positivity and your chin?
Okay, sure. Thank you for all those kind words. I suppose first point would be, I guess I feel like it's always important to remember whatever privileges we have. And that's been particularly important for me during the COVID-19 pandemic, because whatever we're all going through, I mean, if we're fairly safe, healthy at home and doing what we love doing in life, I think we're incredibly lucky. And there are lots of people out there risking their lives every day, whether it be during COVID or not. So I guess there's always that just remembering your privileges point that I think is really important, and sort of using that as something to come back to. I suppose, I empathize with your point about, the mental health issues for artists and composers. I mean, I did study composition. I did play the clarinet to a fairly high level, and people really encouraging me to go to conservatoire or study composition or go for the next diplomas. And I realized that I didn't want to have that challenge of kind of having to be on your own a lot. I just realized what my particular sort of preferences and strengths and weaknesses are. And I guess the reason I've moved into the side of supporting other people is because I really thrive when I'm actually connecting with people and collaborating and building partnerships. So I suppose the other bit of advice from that is just try and be really, really clear about what makes you the most happy and what's the best fit for your personality in terms of the way you work or the expectations you set for yourself. Because I always feel that the one piece of career advice that no one ever gives you, I mean, I'm not even sure if career advice services exist anymore, but when they did,
I have a course. I have a course for musicians.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So, yeah. but I think, when you're at the level of, picking which subjects you study or which university you go to and all of that, I just think people consider the wrong metrics. It's not about, oh, well, that subject might get you into that kind of profession. Ultimately, it's about what is it that you really love in life? What do you love spending most of your time doing? And then how could you build a job around that? And I think, the music has always been at the center of my life. My mum was a pianist and organist and always encouraging us to kind of get involved in music at home. And then I think for that reason, it was just always part of my studies. And then it was always the work that I wanted to do. So I think that's, again, something important to come back to, and also to share with with the next generation. You know, it's not about some sort of formula that says, oh, this is how you're going to have a balance between earning X amount of money and getting this amount of enjoyment. Enjoyment and passion is the most important thing, and money can't buy that. So just, you know,
totally agree with you.
Find a vocation rather than a job, you know. And then otherwise, I suppose, I think if you work in the arts, you're likely to be working for a non-profit or a charity. If you're working on this side of the industry that I'm in, and if you choose that route, then obviously your motivation needs to be you want to make a difference, and that's also the vision of your organization is trying to improve conditions for everyone. And for us at the moment, it's about doing everything we can to create a thriving and connected and equitable ecosystem for new music. And I think it's very inspiring to just think about all the different ways that I personally can contribute to that, but also the different ways that I can influence others to join in. So I suppose that's where I get my, that's where I get my drive. And I just find it incredibly rewarding to work with people who share your values or who can grow what you do, because often the organizations I've worked with are relatively small in comparison to the largest companies in the music industry. So it's always about, how can we use that exciting flexibility and the opportunity to kind of move quickly, respond to change, be nimble, and how can we use that to kind of kickstart new things with new people. And I just really love that, that kind of process, I suppose.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You don't only have to choose the path that will lead you to a certain goal, but also the path that fits your personality the best, and you're not necessarily all thriving in the same direction. So, I mean, that's also a part of what I tell musicians that come to consultation meetings with me or that they take my course. Not everybody can be in front, and not everybody can be a facilitator. You have to find your strong suit and focus on that. And I think it will also make you happier when you do that. Thank you so much for this really nice answer. Moving on to something a bit different about challenges for female musicians. We all know that in the music industry, that's always been challenging, of course, for women, whether it is with discouraging them to compose or perform, as I can say for myself. When I chose the trombone as my instrument when I was 9 years old, my teachers and my family have repeatedly tried to convince me to play a more girly instrument like the flute or the clarinet. So nowadays we are already on track, I guess, to solve some of these issues, but it seems that new challenges keep popping up on the go. So what do you think are the future key challenges for women in the music industry?
I think one of the big key challenges now, and particularly for a program like Key Change, for example, is to just keep the momentum going and to realize that with that explosion of activity around Me Too, it has to be seen as work that needs to continue probably for 2 decades and another 2 generations of women. It's not just going to change overnight, because it's so deeply seated in society for men to be at the front and for women to be supporting them. So I think it's about realizing how long that challenge is going to last. I'm going to have to share that obviously I'm watching lots of various things on Netflix and other channels I'd never heard of in the US. And I've been watching Mrs. America, which is this really fascinating sort of drama series based on truth, starring Cate Blanchett. And it's about Phyllis. Yeah, it's a really brilliant cast. And it's about Phyllis Schlafly, who was an incredibly destructive force opposing the Equality Rights Amendment when some of the great feminists like Gloria Steinem had been campaigning for each state to adopt that new way of thinking and a new aspect of the Constitution. And that was in the 70s. And you can see when you look back at programs like this that, you know, there have been so many moments in history where people have kind of felt like the job is nearly done, and then it just goes backwards. And obviously we're seeing that in politics as well. So I think it's about the long goal and keeping our expectations high and not being complacent and not sitting back. I think it's about continuing to demonstrate how women in leadership roles, and, you know, I've said this so many times now, but the whole point about diverse organizations, diverse boards are more successful. It's very easy to make the economic argument. And if you just look at what's happened with COVID-19, you know, there are articles about how the countries that have actually come through this in the sort of most effective way are countries led by women, you know, like New Zealand and other places. So, and where are the worst examples? You know, places that are led by men who exactly men who operate more or less as dictators. Or exceptionalists. You know, so I think it's continuing to make sure that we keep pushing for that change. In music, I am optimistic in that I think, you know, amongst the next generation, there are so many talented women that I think it's going to be impossible for promoters and programmers to ignore that. And I think what would make a real difference is if some of the most successful female artists were taking more of a stand as well. So, you know, the fact that Taylor Swift has now finally spoken out against voting for Trump's party is a really interesting kind of thing to consider, because she obviously just didn't feel that she could do that until quite a few years into her career. And I think, you know, artists having the freedom to actually stand up and say what they believe is really important. And that actually goes back to, you know, one of the things I think is concerning in the music industry is the power of the legal structure and the contracts around some of the most popular and lucrative artists, I think is the reason why we haven't had the Me Too movement that happened in film. You know, there is so much kind of censorship that no one is really able to speak out about either what's happened to them personally in terms of sexual harassment or what their view is on what's happening in the world. And I think if there was more consideration of the what was it called? The diversity rider, the equality rider, which a film star was proposing at the Oscars, which was, you know, if you sign up to do a film, make sure that the film that you're getting involved with has a good number of strong female characters, that the cast is diverse, that it's been thought through in a way that properly represents our current world and is not yet another kind of fantasy around sort of, you know, insisting on male domination forever, which is just not what is going to be good for our planet.
Yeah, it's the same with the pay gap. I heard that some actors are now refusing to be hired for certain roles unless their female compatriots would receive the same pay. Would they have an equally important part in the film? It also reminds me of that day that I heard about Beyonce's Super Bowl halftime show, and everybody was talking about the day Beyonce became Black. Seriously? I mean, what do you mean? So I guess we're still quite far away from a lot of our goals. And I think it also has to do a lot with the fact that not a lot of women are in key positions, let's say decision-making positions, if you look at the music industry. So I think there's about 15 or 16% women in key professions such as artistic directors and programmers. So before we can change anything within the programming, we first have to change the demographics of the programmers, I believe.
I agree. I mean, I think also it's important to remember a few other things. I mean, just quickly on your point about the gender pay gap and men in film standing up for their female colleagues, what would the equivalent be in music? That's not happening as much. I think that, the 1975 is actually a really good example, because they are speaking out and using their platform to talk against sexism in the industry, as they did at the Brits last year. So I think that's a really good example, but it's pretty rare. So I think we need more of that in music. But also, yes, we need more women in leadership roles, but we also need to make sure that those women are really going to support other women to succeed. And I think that's another challenge we have. True. So again, going back to this program, Mrs. America, and the history around that particular moment in time. And then also, if you think about the Women's March here in the US, one of the problems we have is that women's groups start to splinter. And so, women of color, and then white women, and then, women from different countries or women from different industries are all kind of acting in silos. And then it's actually quite complicated to get a joined up movement where everyone agrees to aiming for one goal, and that is covering every need. And I think we really need to find a way to galvanize ourselves so that we're not kind of weakening the impact we can have. And also, I think when we started Women Make Music, which is the first thing we did at PRS Foundation in 2011, it was a very interesting precursor to then arriving at Key Change in 2017, because at that point, Me Too hadn't happened. And when I was doing a bit of initial research into Women Make Music, various colleagues and composers and artists who are, good allies of mine, they didn't really agree with it. There was the point from composers and artists who'd already succeeded that it should only be about your talent, and it should not be about whether you're a woman or a man, and they didn't want to be known as a female composer. They just wanted to be known as a great composer. And what was fascinating for me is that pretty much all of those people, without exception, have completely come around 360 and are totally realizing that the only way to push for change is to have targeted initiatives, and is to do things that can push things forward. And of course, we don't want them forever, but having that women only fund, and then also having Key Change with this very bold pledge, meant that there was more awareness of those statistics, the ones that I was talking about in Tallinn. And people were fairly shocked. And then they could also see a very tangible way in which they could get involved in helping to change that. So I think, I'm proud that everyone involved at PRS Foundation, including the board and my chair at the time, who was a woman, I'm proud that they really wanted to stand up and do this, even though it wasn't respected by everyone right then. And it's proven to show that actually it was a very important instrument to, the next phase of trying to reach a level of equity in music.
I remember that I really liked the graphics of your campaign. So you removed, if you took, let's say a poster of an existing festival, and you removed all the names of the male headliners, and you only left the females on the posters. So out of 100 names, you would only have, let's say, 4 or 5 left. And that's shocking, because, you could really see the difference when it's highlighted graphically in this way. And it took my attention immediately when I saw it.
Exactly. I mean, I'm so grateful to the people who did that on social. I mean, that was not something that I invented. It was something that had been doing the rounds on social media for a few years. But again, it was not necessarily picked up to the extent it was, right at the very beginning. And some festivals that literally had no women. I mean, it was kind of like just pointing out the unthinkable. And I think what's so extraordinary about that, and I'm sure that you've heard this yourself, but whenever I was giving talks at conferences or interviews, there were particularly from from men. There were always, well, yeah, but it's got to be about the quality. We can't. And so that whole question about diversity and quality can't possibly be, in the same sentence is completely ridiculous.
That's the assumption. Yeah.
Exactly. But
Totally.
actually think about what you're doing to achieve diversity is that you are kind of selecting people or finding people from a broader talent pool. Therefore, the outcome is going to be of a higher quality. And the other thing, which is a different thing to explain, I suppose, is you're not telling me that all of those bands that have white guys on guitar, drum, and vocal are 5-star performances. That is just not possible. And so just the fact that they're all guys is not going to mean that they're going to be of a higher quality. We know that the quality of music varies at festivals, and we know that there are some bands that are actually not very interesting at all. So let's make space for some different voices that will actually make the whole experience more fulfilling for everyone and more relevant as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they say that they don't get enough applications from female artists, but I think it's also due to the fact that you don't see a lot of headliners that are females, that you're not attracted to apply as a female performer to a certain festival. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who programs a festival. Well, I won't say the name or the place because I think it's maybe inappropriate to say, but he sent me an email with the lineup for his last year festival, introducing the program. And I've checked the program and I thought it was really cool, but it did bother me that only 4.8% of the performers in general were female. And I'm not talking about headliners. I'm talking about including the band members who are female from the headliners bands. So there was actually only one headliner that was female, and she wasn't introduced as, let's say, that so-and-so and her trio, but this and that ensemble. So I wrote him an email saying like, hey, I really liked your program. I don't know if you noticed, but there is this thing going on in the program that I only spotted 4.8% female performers. And I mean, I'm sure that it was not done to hurt anybody, but maybe it's worth talking about it because, we should start a discussion about gender balance in music. So in return, I received a really, 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 really blunt email saying, well, all sorts of things. And one in particular that caught my attention was telling off female musicians for not including more female performers within their own formations. And that he doesn't have the time to, browse for new female artists because only 5% of the artists that actually applied were female. And that's why they are represented like that in the program. Well, my reaction was because they're not in the program, then they don't want to apply. And when I see your festival, I don't want to apply for a festival because I know I will get a negative answer. And I only have a limited amount of time being an independent musician applying for gigs. What would be your reaction to a colleague like that?
I think this notion that the responsibility has to be on women to improve the number of women in their band or whatever is really misconceived and not helpful because the majority, if we think about it in very broad brush terms, the majority of men in power and, for example, in jazz, leading bands or leading programming, the majority are male. So I think one of the really, really important things about Key Change was having a mixed group of people, men and women, working together on this change and having male ambassadors as well as female ambassadors to talk about why it's important for everyone and why equality or gender justice, as we call it in the UK, why that in the US, why that is going to benefit everyone, not just the women who aren't represented yet. And one thing I'm looking into here, and we're only at the early stages, is I'm working with Terry Lynn Carrington, who is a jazz drummer. She's an incredible artist and band leader and educator and role model and inspirational force in jazz, and she's leading the Berkeley Gender Justice Institute, which, you know, that in itself, I really do like the language that's used here in the US, because it's very kind of it's almost confrontational, I suppose. It's much more direct than the kind of language you use in the UK. You know, gender justice instead of gender balance, which is the sort of thing, you know, we tend to say in the UK. So I'm working with her on an idea for a program which is actually about encouraging some of the top male band leaders in jazz to work with us by having women in their bands who are at the earliest stages of their career, and they get a kind of placement, which means that there will be it's kind of form of training, I guess, but it's also helping both sides realize why, you know, if younger women in whichever genre actually, if they're not getting a chance to really develop their craft by being on the road in different bands that they can contribute to, then they're kind of always going to be left out, because then, you know, that argument about, oh, they're not experienced enough or they haven't got enough gigs under their belt comes up. And so we're just in a catch-22. So I think those kinds of shifts in psychology are really important, about, you know, men realizing that their bands are going to be more successful if they actually try and bring in more talent. And I think, you know, your point about the barriers when it comes to applying to a festival or whatever it might be, which clearly doesn't really support women, I think, you know, that's totally understandable, because if you can't, the very famous phrase, if you can't see it, then you can't be it, you know. And
well, privilege is unseen by the people who have it. I think that's the main thing.
Exactly. And I think one of the reasons I was really keen with Key Change and just generally the work we're doing with PRS Foundation, I was keen to kind of ensure that we were promoting role models at the same time as focusing on the next generation. So I don't think it's enough to just say, oh, it's gonna take us you know, 2 more generations to get there, so let's just wait and see it happen. That's not going to happen unless we really...
You cannot wait for the change. You have to be the change.
Exactly. But you also have to, in some ways, unfortunately for the women who are already there, you have to almost over promote them to ensure that people can actually see them, because they're competing against so many, you know, men who are in the same space as them. So I think that's really important. And then, of course, you know, it's also crucial if we're thinking about the next generations and solidarity. We've got to think more about intersectionality, and we've got to make sure that, you know, feminism is not a white middle class movement. We've got to make sure that women of color in music and also trans, non-binary, any person who, you know, identifies with being underrepresented should be, you know, part of our mission, I think.
I totally agree. What stands out to me the most in panels that are discussing gender balance, you know, if you go into the room, you usually see about 50 women and about 3 men. So do you have any suggestions how to get the word across to more male partners? Because sometimes it feels like we are preaching to the choir.
Exactly. Well, my feeling, I think you know, there have been times at the very beginning of Women Make Music where, you know, I've been involved with sort of women-only showcases, but I think we are at a point where I would say no event about gender equality, unless it's supposed to be a sort of closed confessional sort of mentoring experience, should be women only, because the minute you do that, guys think they don't need to be there, and they think it's just a sort of women's club initiative. So I think one of the secrets is making sure that men are on the panel. I think also, the kind of women in music terminology language is sort of feels a bit tired. So I think it's about finding a different angle on what you're trying to communicate. So, you know, for example, at industry conferences, what a lot of people are there for, particularly in the commercial world, is they're there to try and find out how they can strengthen their businesses or how they can navigate the next challenge in digital or how they can lobby government about X, Y, Z. And I think first rule is whatever discussion you're having, not about gender equality, should have, you know, men and women contributing to the debate. And then if you are having a conversation that's really about the, you know, the advantages of having more women in your company, then describe it in a way that starts with what people are actually going to get out of it. So, you know, how to build resilience or how to increase your, you know, your income or how to become, you know, more appealing to a broader audience. There are lots of things that you can throw in that don't even that mean you don't have to give people the impression that it's another kind of regurgitating of statistics and lamenting of the situation we're in. I really feel like we have to get onto action-orientated responses, and I think that's why I've kept up my optimism, because I just think once you know what the problem is, you don't have to talk about it every time you meet. You just need to do something that responds to it.
Yeah. So that's also about staying relevant, is you have to evolve and stop victimizing yourself and actually take action in, you know, in the areas that need it the most.
Exactly.
As you probably know, I've been giving lectures together with Steve Mead, the artistic director of the Manchester Jazz Festival, about a very much needed skill, how to develop relationships between artistic directors and independent musicians. Now, I only recently started to work with funders, and the first work I've done with funders was in 2018 when I was an artist in residence at the Amsterdam Roots Festival. And I believe that cultivating personal relationships in the music industry is much more important than acting on contacts. Can you share with me some common mistakes that independent musicians make when they are applying for funding? And what advice would you give them to improve that field of their work?
Oh, good question. And you mean really just when they're submitting applications, or do you mean in the way that they approach funders at events?
Both.
Both, yeah.
Because I believe the relationship has to be a real relationship. You cannot just jump on someone and say, it's the same with being an independent musician and looking for a gig, right? You will not jump at someone who is the artistic director of a festival and say, hey, book me, I'm here. You know, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You have to find a way to contribute to their program and maybe offer them a commissioned work without them having to pay for it, or maybe, you know, tit for tat. So try to suggest something in opposing to just asking or feeling like they owe you something. And I see a lot of musicians making these mistakes, and then they come to me, they're asking for consultations, and they weep about the fact that, oh, nobody pays attention to them and nobody gets back to their emails. Well, there is a reason why.
So, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is the most important thing is to make sure that your number one priority is making sure you're good at what you do and that your music is really standing out from everyone else's. Yeah. So you can't like embark on a career in the music industry and sort of do a bit of playing and then think that the rest is all about networking, because it just isn't. You know, and even the people who've sort of taken off in extraordinary ways have often taken a long time to get there, and they've really worked hard at it, you know, and
that's my example when I give when people ask me about, you know, persistence and endurance. So I always give the example of Fleetwood Mac, that they had to release 10 albums before they became famous with the 11th album. So it's not necessarily going to happen in the first night. It takes a lifetime to become a one-night success, an overnight success.
Exactly. And there will be times when maybe, you know, something goes really well and then it doesn't go as well. So I think you have to be there for the ups and downs. On the flip side of all of that, I do think, you know, I'm trying to think of some of the artists who I can remember the most from my time at PRS Foundation. And, you know, it's true that if you've got that combination of being a really strong artist, and for me, the most important thing is being distinctive. You know, there are so many independent musicians. The most important thing for me is being somehow, you know, being so true to yourself that you're different to how the next person sounds. And that for me is always my kind of first benchmark. But beyond that, as a funder, thinking about like when I was at international showcases, I think it is really helpful if you can make sure that you have the confidence to speak to, whether it's artistic director or funder or whoever it might be, when you have the opportunity, and to be interested in what they do. So there's not like an immediate sell, but I think there is, you know, on the one hand, what you're probably not going to succeed with is if you're kind of totally removed from trying to do the kind of face-to-face connection. But on the other hand, if you're so in someone's face that it feels like a hard sell and they're just doing the same to you as they've done to everyone, then it's not a positive experience. So I guess that means, you know, do your research, make sure you can understand like what does that funder or artistic programmer care about and what's made them unique, and then try and think about where you fit into that, so that you're having a conversation with another human being. You're both, you know, doing different kinds of work for a living, and also just be sensitive to when it feels as though the moment is, you know, right or wrong. Sometimes if you know, you see it at industry conferences. Of course, if you go to a panel and someone's been on the panel, that person will stay behind and meet everyone in the line who wants to meet you. But when you get that moment, don't take 10 minutes when there are 5 people behind you to try and sort of steal
talk about yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's a really, you know, it's a really I can understand why it's a difficult thing to get right. And I suppose, you know, if you think back to the funding that I was involved with launching at PRS Foundation, the Momentum Fund that we launched with Arts Council, that was also about showing you knew how to get at least the beginnings of a team around you, so that you weren't the only voice for yourself. And that's not always possible, I know, but I think if you can start, even if you don't have anyone yet, start thinking about, like, if you could find the resource, who would be the first team member you'd want? Would it be, you know, a part-time PR, or would it be a manager, or, you know, what, or is it a lawyer? But whoever it is, try and use them to help you with your own messaging and representation.
I usually tell musicians that if they don't have representation yet, whether it is a booker or a manager, it might help a lot if they sign up for a music association or a collective, and then let the collective do some of the representation, or list them at least as your contacts when you're applying for a festival. Sometimes you need to have, for instance, an exhibitor. For instance, like in Jazz Ahead, you would have to have somebody above you to be able to apply for a showcase. Well, now they changed the rules, but previously, until 2 years ago, you had to have someone applying for you, and you could use a body like an association or a collective to do the same work that an agent or a manager does in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would also recommend a couple of other things. I think if you can find some kind of peer network where you're, you know, able to talk to other musicians who are at a similar stage to you, I think it's really inspiring when artists can help each other. So, I mean, on a very large scale, She Said So is a great example of a global network of female music industry professionals who are, excuse me, who are asking each other questions and getting tips on various bits of info or challenges they're having. So that's one thing. And then another, I suppose, is, I know this is not always possible, but if you can find a mentor, particularly a mentor who's more experienced than you, who's got more connections than you, who might be prepared to make a few introductions, I think that's also very valuable. I sort of, thinking about, there are people who've been mentored by, Quincy Jones or whatever, and then you see them on the stage of the Grammys, and it was interesting. I don't think it exists anymore, but there was quite a well-known mentoring protege program that Rolex was running with very well-known composers. Like Philip Glass was one of the mentors, and I think those kinds of things give you an incredible sort of passport to new connections. But going back to my first point, you still need to be bloody good before you kind of start thinking about those things. So keep honing your craft and keep giving yourself space to come up with really distinctive, original material.
Yeah. And also keep on doing it. Like if you go to one conference, it's not enough to learn the skill. I don't like the word networking. I really think it's about cultivating meaningful personal relationships. So when I go to a conference, I go there to make friends. And, if I go to a party, I will end up, I'm relatively mildly extrovert, not so much. So if I go to a party, then I will talk to 4 or 5 people in one-on-one conversations, and I will perhaps dance a few dances, but I will kind of do it all by myself. So I'm not the person that will, just be the animal of the party. No, but these 3 or 4 people that I will talk to will probably end up being at least good acquaintances, if not friends, later on. And I think you gotta kind of recognize your strong suit. And if your strong suit is making friends, you're probably in the right profession, because eventually, once you start working with these people, if they do become your colleagues, you will spend a lot of time with them, especially if it's on tour in not so easy conditions.
Yeah.
If you're stranded reports, refused entry to a country, or like visa issues, I don't know, you name it, in small cars with 5 people and a drum set. So you want to be in this scenarios only with friends. You don't want to be with people that you don't want to have a beer with,
Exactly. And I think because of how the word cultivating comes across to me here in the US, I think the way I've heard that word used is more in relation to cultivating donors and fundraising. So I would probably use the word nurturing is probably what I would say, but I totally agree. And, the other truth is, again, going back to those sort of core principles of life, great collaborations do tend to come about between people who connect in a really positive way and people who end up really liking each other. And you can't, even in this digital world, you can't take out the importance of personalities kind of working together well in whichever scenario. We're still communicating now, even if we're not in the same room or in the same car or hanging out in a bar. You can still, it's all about those shared values and what you're actually trying to get out of life, in fact.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So I have a few questions from the audience. At least these were almost all my questions, but I think you kind of answered most of them, at least the hidden ones, within your other answers. So I'll move on to the Q&A with your permission.
Of course.
So we have Talia Ilan. She's a conductor from Israel, and she's asking, how do you see the future of the orchestral world? What will be the new form of a concert? And will there be less or more concerts? And what will be the future of orchestras, which are economically on the edge?
Wow. So that sounds like it's more of a question about COVID-19, perhaps. But I think,
Yeah. Or maybe a question as a funder,
yeah, sure.
as somebody who is for a funding organization.
Sure. I mean, I think these are really challenging times for orchestras right now because of the pandemic. On the positive side, and I'm talking now really from a US perspective, because that's where I am and that's where I'm currently connecting to orchestras. So on the positive side, so for example, the League of Orchestras is doing its conference digitally at the moment over the next few months, and thousands of people have signed up to that conference. So way more than would have ever gone to the conference in person. There is clearly here in the US a very large number of orchestras, and they have a very sort of, in a way, important and prestigious position in society. And I think there is obviously a big concern about how they're going to get through this period. I think the other positive thing is that there's also been a lot of work that's been happening and is growing around equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're running a program at New Music USA called Amplifying Voices, where we've basically created a program where we'll have 6 consortia of orchestras, each co-commissioning a composer of color. And that means that each composer will have at least 4 different performances of their work. So it's going to be a kind of a big statement once this program launches. And of course, it's going to be delayed, but I've been encouraged by the response of the orchestras who wanted to be part of that. And there've also been some high-profile initiatives, like the New York Philharmonic have had a program called 19, which refers to the 19th Amendment, and it's 19 commissions of female composers, and they're presenting that as the biggest commissioning initiative for only women that's ever happened. So that's been a great way of.
Really?
Yeah, I think. Well, it's
the biggest.
I think it certainly is by an orchestra. So I think that's very inspiring. On the downside, I think the time in which orchestras are going to have to sort of remain dark when it comes to performing in the concert hall is going to be much longer than anyone would want. And even Deborah Border, who runs the New York Philharmonic, who was speaking in a recent conference, was talking along the lines of not really being able to open until there's a vaccine, because the 2,700-seater hall at the Lincoln Center in Geffen Hall would only be able to hold, I think it was around 350 people if you impose all of the restrictions that you need for health and safety. There would have to be testing every single day. So for me, obviously, COVID is a huge challenge. Beyond that, I think it's all about audience development. It's about how can orchestras reach the next generation, and how can more young people be inspired to go to the concert hall to see orchestras, and how can the older population have the confidence to go back knowing that there's more risk attached to it and knowing that they're in a high-risk group. So those are the points I would make. But the person asking the question is a female conductor, and I think
Yes,
that's the other inspiring change that I've been seeing. Maren Alsop is on our advisory council. I think she's completely inspirational. She was obviously the first woman to conduct the last night of the proms in the UK, and she's got a fellowship that lots of female conductors have come through, and we're seeing it more and more in the US and in the UK, thankfully. So I think that's really changing, and that's really important because it represents such a figure of authority in classical music. So I think I'm really pleased that people are focused on that.
Thank you. We have Asaf Lukowitz from the Netherlands asking, I'm wondering if there's a list of festivals that is available online that have a gender-balanced program, and how well informed are female musicians of this when they are booking gigs, and how can their bookings improve due to that resource?
That's a really great question. So the 300 festivals that have signed up to Key Change are all on the website, which is keychange.eu. In response to whether musicians are looking at that, I know through anecdotal evidence that they are, because people have come up to me when I was in Paris, when you could still travel, and I was at the French industry conference there. A woman came up to me and said, I came to this conference because I saw they'd signed up to Key Change, and so I really believed in it. And even more recently, I did an interview on Atlanta radio, and the interviewer suddenly realized just before we started the conversation that I was the founder of Key Change, and she said, oh wow, yeah, I spoke to an artist the other week on our show, and they said they only chose this festival because it signed to Key Change. So I think that is certainly something that can influence people, and I think there's more we can do to keep promoting that and give women a chance to sign up in that way, or to encourage any local festivals they know to get involved and make a statement as well.
Great. So you should check, if you're a female musician, you should check keychange.eu for the list of festivals that you could approach for your bookings. So I have a question from Martina Markowska. I think you know her. She's from Poland. She's the artistic director of the Jazz Art Festival. She says, my question would be, is the number of Key Change festivals rising in Central Europe? Our festival, Katowice Jazz Art, remains the only one from Poland, but I wonder if more countries from our part of Europe are joining.
I think it's possible that they're not, and that may not necessarily be only because there's a lack of interest. It may also be just to do with resources that the team has, which is now split across London, Stockholm and Hamburg, because I think a lot depends on a festival in each of the countries really driving for people to sign up to the pledge. So I think if there are, if our partners and friends in Poland can help spread the word, I think that would be fantastic. And please also feel free to kind of tweet out some of these questions to the Key Change team. It's at Key Change EU on Instagram and on Twitter, or just get directly in touch, because I think, in many ways, it's a kind of volunteer-led movement when it comes to getting more people to sign up. And I think at the moment, obviously, all of the partners are pretty preoccupied with what's happening with their events and cancellations. So there may have been a bit of a delay on getting more Central European partners involved, but we would love help with that. So that's a good question.
Yeah. So basically, Martina, you should get in contact with Vanessa and you can find out more about collaborating, perhaps.
And also with the Key Change team. So there's Maxi in PRS Foundation office and Christina in Hamburg.
All right. That's good to know. So their contact details are on the PRS website, I imagine, right?
Yeah, on the Key Change website. Key Change.
The Key website. Yeah. All right. So we have a question from our colleague Steve Mead from the Manchester Jazz Festival. Are some musical genres more gender imbalanced than others? Which ones are harder to rebalance and why?
Sorry, can you repeat that question a moment? I've got some background noise. Sorry.
Yes. So we have a question from our friend and colleague Steve Mead from the Manchester Jazz Festival. Are some musical genres more gender imbalanced than others? Which ones are harder to rebalance and why?
So that's a brilliant question. And for the first answer I'll give gives me an opportunity to mention another thing we're working on here at New Music USA, which is a film fund, which is going to support film composers who are women or people of color, because in fact, the world of film and media music is one of the most extreme when it comes to domination of white male composers. So we're going to launch a specific initiative in response to that. So I think that's one genre that's really amongst the worst within the music world. I think we also know that there's definitely been a different kind of resistance in the jazz world, which is why I'm talking actively with Terry Lynn Carrington. That must also be why there is such a thing as the Berkeley Gender Justice Institute, because it's such an issue. So I think whilst there has been some interest from the jazz world, I think there is a challenge because there's so much reverence of the tradition and the way in which people are have historically been apprentices and learnt their craft, and there's a certain way and rhythm in which you get into the jazz scene. And I think changing that is really important, whilst also respecting that women do need the opportunity to go on the road and to be in these incredible bands, and that needs to change, because we need those doors to be opened by the men that are currently controlling those structures. So I think there's definitely a challenge in jazz, and then otherwise it's particular careers within the industry, like in the recording studio. There are lots of great initiatives, including, I think, Spotify, but also Women Produce Music is another organization where they're trying to increase the interest amongst young women to get into that career, because people just look at it and think it's a man's world. I think the level of sexual harassment in that part of the industry is probably pretty serious, and it's also just seen to be a boys' club. So I think
that's very true.
Yeah, so I think those are the ones that sort of jump out. I think pop music and independent music has been improving, and I think the classical world has also been improving. There are so many fantastic.
The classical world seems to have achieved already the 50-50% gender balance. At least when you look at orchestras, it's about 50-50.
Well, I think when it comes to composers, there's been a really strong, conscious effort to ensure that a lot of the composers people are commissioning from now on are there's always an equal number of men and women. I think in the classical world, there's an extra nuance, which is, okay, but who are getting the biggest, longest pieces, and what are the bases for some of the commissions? So I've got friends
it's
who
like
are
musicians comparing gear.
So composers of color, for example, I've spoken to, who will say to me, they're going to get commissioned for another 4-minute fanfare that everyone will play and then feel like they've done the job, rather than it being a really serious kind of commitment financially. So it's not perfect, but I think in the UK and here as well, to some extent, if they're receiving funds from any government sources or city council sources, then there is a focus on diversity, and so I think there has been pressure pressure on these organizations to really look at what they're putting out there. So I think the classical world has been in some ways moving quicker than others, strangely enough.
Yeah, especially as far as instrumentalists. Like if you look at the gender balance in the orchestra, then I think it's quite achieved already, but I wouldn't say the same about composers or conductors, because you can hardly ever see female conductors anywhere. And in the jazz world, I mean, it seems like such a small community. Like for me, it was enough to go to 3 conferences, and I already feel like I've known everybody. Well, now I've been going to conferences for 8 years, so of course I know more and more people. But I often get a request from programmers of jazz festivals if I could name the top 5 bands from Israel, or if I could name the top 5 bands from the Netherlands. And later on, when I check back their program, it looks like my entire list has been incorporated in their program. So sometimes I wonder, am I doing their job for them? Like they just kind of rely on recommendations from friends to make the program complete in the areas that they don't know much about the local music. And that's maybe also the result of the imbalance of gender in the programming, because if all the programmers are white males above 60 years of age, so they will recommend their peers who are from a similar demographic. I mean, is that a valid question? What do you think about that?
I think it's a very valid question, because often it's changed a bit now because people have called this out. But at the beginning of the gender equality debate, the response from men primarily, there may have been some women who responded in this way, but was always, well, where are they? We really want to include more women, but we just don't know where they are. They're not applying, or they're not putting things forward. And then that's why the debate here in the US has kind of become, I think, more advanced and a bit more sophisticated than it was in the UK when I left, because they're looking at structures and inclusivity and equity. They're not just looking at getting that outcome of 50-50. They're looking at the way in which you can actually achieve this, and the way that structures need to change for the long term for it to be sustainable. And there are so many things to consider when you think about it in that level of detail, because it's really about how a decision's made, who defines what quality is, who defines who the top 5 bands are, who defines which women are right for which festival. And when you come to the answer of that question, it's your point. It's a very, very small pool of the same people. So if you think about, particularly as I was doing the rounds of all of the music industry conferences, there were some places where I would walk into the main foyer and nearly everyone apart from me were guys of a certain age with beards and glasses, and they weren't over 60s. It was sort of, they were there too, but there was also this sea of programmers who were all from very similar backgrounds, nearly all white.
They're all wearing each other's festivals t-shirts.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're tipping each other on who the buzzy acts are. And I think, what's also really interesting to think about is the algorithms of streaming services like Spotify, because if they're essentially sending you to another artist like the one you just listened to, you're going to get these kind of ever decreasing circles of people just listening to what is the dominant force on that platform, which historically will have been, white guys making indie pop. Fortunately, obviously, Black music generally is incredibly successful across the world, but in the UK at the moment, it's been amazing to see what Spotify's done to help the rise of Stormzy and Dave and other grime, hip hop, pop acts of, who are kind of working against the old status quo. But again,
but they're also brilliant, so that helps too.
They're also brilliant, but they are also all male. And I would love to see Little Sims in the same position.
I agree.
And others. So I still think there is an issue there as well. But yeah, I think that
we're kind of creating our own little pool of Spotify algorithm in humans when we do that. Yeah. So the last question from the audience is from Linol Oren. She's an opera singer from the Czech Republic. Hi, Vanessa. I think it's really cool that you are promoting a better balance of gender, but I'm not sure about the 50-50 concept. Shouldn't the decision on who performs be on the merit and other criteria other than gender? Thanks. So she brings us back to our initial point, basically.
Yeah, so that's the question of quality versus diversity. I would say you can have both, and there's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't have both. So it's not just about 50-50. It's obviously, we're assuming that you're going for the highest quality of artists, and you're also making sure that you find the exceptionally talented women that are out there as well as men.
Yeah. Well, at least for me, it's about enlarging your pool of reference rather than narrowing it down, because you're not, if you are a certain type of programmer, you're unlikely to notice these acts. So by embracing a bigger pool of possible acts, you might actually make your program better.
Exactly. And it's about
This is
growing
really
your
awesome.
audience as well.
Yeah, that's true, because when you program certain kind of acts, your audience will stay static and from the same generation, let's say, or same typecast. Rather than if you, if you expand your festival reach as far as programming, you will also reach new audiences. So this is not only about giving advices to musicians. Please tune in, programmers, when you like. Um, so that's basically the stage of questions. And now we're just going to do a fun banter thing.
Okay.
I really like this part of the interview because it's originally from questions written by Bernard Pivot. And it's a bunch of just fun questions. Think about the first thing that goes to your head, and it's not about overthinking too much. All right. So, what is your favorite word?
Love.
Great word. The Bob Dylan version, or a four-letter word, or
no, four-letter LOVE.
All right. What is your least favorite word?
I have to say hate.
Nice. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Sunshine, I think. It's nature.
You were born in the wrong country.
I'm from the southwest of England, from Cornwall. So nature and the sea, actually, I probably should have said, definitely inspires me.
Yeah, the nature is there, but the sun isn't. What turns you off?
Well, I don't want to be boring and just say rain, because that would just be too British and too weather focused.
It's all right. The Dutch talk about the weather.
Arrogance.
Yeah, I must agree with that. It's probably the first thing that turns me off too. It's especially with musicians. This is the reason why I don't go to jam sessions anymore, because it's all about showing off who has the best saxophone rather than it's not about listening so much or creating something in the moment. Yeah. What is your favorite curse word? What's your favorite moment of the conversation?
See, I've never really sworn that much, but I think since I've been here and I've been watching news about Trump, I think it has to be fuck.
Yeah, well, can you imagine? I woke up on my birthday in November 9th, and I heard that Trump was elected and Leonard Cohen died. And it all coincided with some nights. So it's like I was like, oh God. It's like, isn't that enough?
Yeah.
What sound or noise do you love?
Birdsong.
You're the second guest who said birdsong.
At the moment, it's really amazing because we have to wear masks in New York, and at the moment we're just supposed to go out once a day for exercise or essential shopping. So I go for a run down through the streets of Brooklyn to the water, and it's just amazing because there are hardly any cars around. You're just hearing birdsong, and in Brooklyn there is one street where there are lots of parakeets for some reason, some historic reason. They came over in the past, so it's just incredible. You sort of feel like you're in the middle of another place whilst you're in the city.
I've seen your photos on Facebook from the runs.
Yeah, it's a good route.
It's actually, it makes me think that with the COVID pandemic, we're actually helping the planet to,
definitely
go back to normal in a way.
Yeah.
Less pollution.
Yeah.
Less movement. What sound or noise do you hate?
I don't like broken glass. I don't know, it always just makes me, the sound of breaking glass.
Yeah. Anything falling on the floor, I think.
Yeah, and obviously sirens. I'm not, sirens at the moment, means a particular thing, but we also, when we lived in London, we were in Stoke Newington, quite near a area where there are lots of sirens, and that was keeping us awake when we first moved in. We got used to it, but it's still, again, it's not very peaceful.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I suppose I probably should say lawyer, because my dad and my brother are both lawyers, and I kind of like the idea of, representing people who need your support, so I wouldn't, not commercial law, but sort of law where you're in human rights and making an argument and winning an argument, maybe.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, I could picture you like as an environmental lawyer or something. Yeah. You would be very human, though. It's not the first association that I have with that profession.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be very good at it, but let's,
I don't know about that. I think when you put your mind into something, you're bound to be good at it, especially with your passion. So what profession would you not like to do?
I probably wouldn't be a very good doctor or surgeon. I'm a bit squeamish. I think that was definitely not something I ever thought about.
I used to study medicine myself, and I knew that for me, what would have done it is the responsibility. I couldn't take the responsibility.
Yeah, extraordinary. Yeah.
Yeah. That's part of the reason why I quit. Also, music was a calling, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I just couldn't go through with the thought that, oh, maybe I will be responsible to someone's lives.
Yeah.
Well, and finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you enter the pearly gates?
This is the beginning of another life.
So you want to relive it all, like, or start a new thing?
Maybe start. I mean, I think I'm not ready. I'm hoping that I would never feel ready to just kind of go to sleep and clock, check out. I think life has its challenges, but it's a pretty amazing thing to experience. So yeah, I wouldn't mind another one. Yeah.
You're a true optimist. I really like that. I somehow have the feeling like, oh yeah, okay. When the time is up, I'll be like, oh yeah, I paid my dues. Thank you. Thanks for the fish. Good night. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
No,
I really enjoyed talking to you.
It's been really great fun. Thanks so much for asking me to speak.
Anytime. You can come back whenever you want.
Thanks.
So thank you for being with us today on whydiymusic.com. Stay tuned for next week, Thursday, May 28th at 12 o'clock CET, when I'll be interviewing John Philip Chanel, the producer of Tori Amos, Tracy Chapman, and Janet Jackson. In the meantime, keep calm and DIY.